Welcome, welcome Facebook Live. And we are here. We're here representing the Racial Justice Collaborative. And I am Diane Wong, and we're happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to come before you all today once again. My name is
Hello.
Charles Minton, by the way.
Hello, everyone. Pharaoh Saunders. Always happy to be here and glad to continue this conversation.
Okay, so we're going to spend a little time talking about going back to the topic that we started, and then we're going to go forward and talk about the Racial Justice Collaborative and some of the things that we do. So last time we were here, we were talking about the police and community, and we were talking about the issue of demilitarize, defund, or abolish. So Pharaoh, do you want to start? Where do you want us to start to come back and talk about that?
Well, I think a way in which it could make sense for us to come back onto this topic would be for us to express our personal positions on where we might fall in that triangle, and particularly because of the second day we're talking about this, express any ideas in which we might have helped change each other's opinions or learned anything about each other's opinions as we discuss this topic.
Okay, what about you, Charles? What what is the most important thing that we can bring to this topic?
First of all, I love the fact that we're continuing to delve into this topic. I think it's been put into the national stage with regards to all the issues that we've been confronted with, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, to name a few. But I think to Pharaoh's point, it's really important perhaps for us to just to restate our opinions on the topic and perhaps even delve a little deeper in terms of, as you mentioned, next steps in terms of what, as a collaborative, we can bring to the table in terms of dealing and rectifying this issue overall, in terms of supporting, particularly, young, not even young, folks of color across the spectrum in terms of dealing with the police, and then, of course, providing some of the restorative practices in terms of folks just being able to just live life as they see fit, with regards to everything that's going on. Unfortunately, throughout the years, Black folks have not had a voice in the matter in terms of even framing the conversation. The conversation and pretty much the direction has been put in place for us by the social constructs of our country with regards to laws and such. But I think now it's incumbent of us to change the narrative and provide our own framework in terms of supporting Black Americans in this country overall.
So one of the things that that I'm thinking about is, what does the Racial Justice Collaborative bring to the table for the issues, the having a discussion, the police and the community? So I just want to point out that we're a full service organization. We believe that you have to start with right from the beginning. You really can't start in at the end of a big confused discussion. You have to start at the beginning and do this kind of cultural audit to see what's going on actually within the community, and then what's going on in the police, so that we can tie down some points where we might be able to engage a discussion. So as Charles said this time, and he also said before, and Pharaoh has said as well, we've got a long and winding road with the police. And so we didn't just get here yesterday. So we have to look at where are we, and where's a good starting point. Uh, what does the community believe, and what when you look at police, um, what do police believe? So that might be a good place to start. What do we believe? Where do we believe we are? And once we tie those things down, we've got a large group, over 20 people, with a lot of expertise within the collaborative, bringing all kinds of historical education. We've also got people who do um, conflict work, and we do mindfulness, so that getting mindfulness is in that self-care arena of how do we take care of ourselves while we start to unfold how we're even going to look at each other. How do we do that? So on the issue of demilitarize, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. As everybody can see watching the news daily, you can see that police departments somehow seem to have tanks on the street, and there's a history of how that happened. Um, so, how did that happen? Why are we here now with tanks on the street?
The most sort of rudimentary answer as to how that happened is because of a combination of supply surplus from the military industrial complex. So you have companies like Lockheed Martin, whatever, that build weapons and militarized vehicles for the US military, and the government then buys them for the US military. But if they make too many vehicles, more than the government orders, then they don't have anyone to buy them and they have all this wasted stock. And so having a alternative source to offload this product onto is a way for those companies to save money. So cities that have police departments being another source of income by being a new purchaser of these weapons and, you know, vehicles designed for warfare, not neighborhood protection, is the one of the primary reasons why that happens. And the other reason is directly tied into it, which is why cities were in a position to outfit their police departments with those weapons, is because of the largely politicized, you know, threats to domestic security. And there's been a few, but like the biggest one in the United States as of the last few decades is the war on drugs. So the necessity for police officers to have tanks and assault rifles and nonsense like that to be able to directly tackle such a prevalent domestic threat is why cities were in the position to buy those weapons from Lockheed Martin and stuff like that in the first place. So those are the two primary things. That's the cause, which is, there's drugs. So for that, we need tanks and assault weapons and armor and stuff like that. And then where do you get those things from? Companies that make too many of those things for the military to buy, so you need to find other people to buy them. And it's a, feedback loop, because then you have lobbyists from those countries that push for agendas that get more groups to buy those things, and it feeds itself.
Well, and I want to see what Charles thinks about this. I think also that psychologically, um, when we started to talk about our cities and the domestic situation, and we started to say we're having a war, we're going to have a war on drugs. So that starts your thinking is, okay, we're in a war. So if we're going to be in a war, then we need the weaponry of warfare. So psychologically, we're in a war. We need the weapons. Charles, what do
Right.
you think?
Pharaoh, you said it well, just in terms of the basic premise of supply and demand. So in other words, there's a demand for quote unquote more policing. So therefore, specific neighborhoods and districts, and then of course states felt the need to sort of empower certain folks to just acquire tanks and other, viable weapons in terms of keeping, in particular, Black folks in place, or specifically to maintain law and order, which is a catchphrase which has been used throughout the years, specifically with Republicans, in terms of the need for structured and often, harsh policing of folks of color within our communities. And just to go back even further, in terms of the need for policing, that comes about just within our Constitution, the Fifth Compromise, in terms of not being able to, not being afforded equal rights until later on, upon living here within this country. And then, of course, upon receiving it, certain folks in power needed to police certain individuals in terms of keeping tabs on them. So therefore, they employed certain organizations, certain groups of people to sort of keep Black folks in line. And whenever the need, or whenever Black folks sort of garnered enough support, or different within different places within perhaps Tulsa, Oklahoma, to name a few, when Black folks started reaching that American dream, they were sort of stripped of that promise and stripped of their basic rights due to the policing and often harsh policing of individuals. So in terms of the need to weaponize policing, this is sort of even predates the war on drugs. It sort of goes back to where we reached the shores of America in a lot of ways, just in terms of the mindset, in terms of having a fear of folks of color. And I think with that said, and that's where I think the need to, and that sort of goes back to what my original opinion was. And actually it's changed, throughout the course of the last couple of months in particular, in terms of seeing the need to just reimagine police altogether, due to the fact that the policing in general is, I think it's steeped in white supremacy, it's steeped in racism. So therefore, it's going to be, really difficult to sort of provide a pivot for folks, particularly for folks who do the policing, in terms of changing their ways, when sort of like the blue wall of silence is sort of incumbent upon the job. Fulfilling quotas in terms of coming down on folks is sort of incumbent on the job. So for me, I think there needs to be a reimagining, and I sort of equate reimagining with sort of abolishing the current system. And with that place, reimagining something which is more aligned in terms of treating folks as individuals, treating folks as citizens of this country. Other folks within certain countries have provided a sort of a framework in terms of how to do that. We sort of need to follow that framework in terms of not just being punitive, but being restorative in our efforts. And you mentioned the Pharaoh, that can start with demilitarization, but I think ultimately for me, that starts with reimagining or abolishing the current structure which is in place.
I think it's an interesting, the couple of words you spoke of, restorative, kind of a restorative justice program that would restore the kind of basic rights of citizens to Black people who haven't really had that in any big way. So there's restorative, but also you mentioned reimagine. So I'm looking at a line that goes from demilitarize, and it cuts right through defund, but defund just kind of the word itself just means take some funds away. But then you start to say reimagine, and then reimagine and abolish together, because it means, as I hear you, to say that we're going to have to create a new system that that works for everybody. And so so the abolition doesn't mean we abolish and then have nothing. It means probably that we reimagine and then start to take pins out of the old system and reimagine. Pharaoh, what do you think about that?
I think it's important to define and understand the difference between the concepts of restructuring versus abolishment. What I think to actually, use the word abolishment is the concept is to remove something in its entirety. And I do generally think that people don't mean have nothing in its place. I think everyone always means to put something in its place. That doesn't mean take the old system and change it. It means put an entirely new system in place. So when you say abolishment, I think that's the level of construction that is required for that kind of process to truly carry its meaning. And if you're saying to, change the policing system, even largely, that would still be reform. It would have to be to completely get rid of it and build something completely anew from the ground up in order to truly be abolishment.
And I think there's a good point, Fred, but I think in terms of reimagining, there's been certain, just I believe in Camden, New Jersey, maybe 2011, 2012, in their own sort of way, sort of quote unquote abolished policing in terms of the way that it was constructed at the moment. And from what I've read, what they did was they pretty much fired, if you could call it fired, all the policing which were in place within Camden, and sort of rather than making it a city mandate, sort of providing within certain counties the power to police within the individual counties. And then from there, they sort of stripped the unions within this police, because as we know, unions are quite powerful. And, as a former school leader, I can tell you right off the bat, in terms of unions and the power that it wields, it's quite intense in terms of keeping folks who don't need to have a job. It keeps them employed due to certain restrictions in terms of just firing someone who needs to be fired. So with that said, they sort of deunionized policing overall as well. And the folks who were fired, they had to go through the process again in terms of getting rehired. And then from there, they had to go through protocols in terms of psychological testing in different respects. So they had the right idea in Camden in terms of reimagining or abolishing. It's tricky in terms of which way you want to frame it. But I do think the term abolish, I think, sort of works more because it goes at the heart in terms of change. The change, and I don't know if reform is the way to go, because we've tried different reforms. I think when I think of reform, I think of cameras. I think of body cameras. When I think of reform, I think of defunding in terms of providing or correcting sort of the streams of state funding into various aspects within a particular community. But when I think of abolish, I just think of in terms of the structure in which police do their job just needs to change. And with that, I think from there, from abolishment, then you could talk about defunding, and then from there, demilitarization. But to me, that starts with abolishing or reimagining what policing looks like. And for me, that framework sort of shifts from being punitive to sort of being restorative. So in other words, if there is an issue within the community in terms of a mental health issue, in the past, they would just send a police officer there. And I could speak firsthand in terms of having family members and who had mental issues. And from there, the police were called to deal with that situation. And if there could be sort of like a different, again, a reimagining of how policing is done in terms of, if this is an issue, you call this aspect of the quote unquote police force in terms of dealing with the situation. That's what I'm thinking about in terms of abolishing what's currently in place and sort of reimagining it to sort of fit the needs of the community.
Well, as I'm listening, and I kind of can see this, the changes in the structure, but I'm also aware that we're talking about a system within a bigger system. Right. So none of this is going to be able to happen without some other kinds of systemic change. So, for example, one of the big problems that we have in this society is just the wealth gap, the inequality of income, of money. So that feeds a lot of the issues and the problems. So that if you've got cities that are densely packed in, even like looking at COVID now and how it's transmitted. So if you're living in a wealthy suburb and you're living in a big spacious place, then perhaps somebody can have a COVID in your family and they can find some place to be by themselves in the basement, in the attic, somewhere. But in the cities where now the cost of living in the cities is already so high that maybe 2 or 3 families have to live together in order to just pay the rent. So, so now, and you can't separate the wealth gap, the lack of proper access to money.
Diane, that ties into redlining that was in place in terms of keeping
Yeah.
folks of color within a certain neighborhood, and they can't veer off of that, out of that neighborhood, you know, obviously for a number of laws and different things which were put in place to keep Black folks in
Yeah.
project areas, in specific neighborhoods, and not allowing them to get loans to buy homes in these, upper and, suburban areas.
And it also taps right into the education system.
Right.
So that the whole, all the systems of education and who gets what kind of education. So to me, you can't, yes, abolish, but we're going to have to abolish some other things too. There's like a lot of huge changes coming down that are all going to have to be sorted out to sort out the police. It's not going to just be the police. It's not going to just be the police unions. There's a lot of other unions that are also connected.
Right.
Let's jump right into education. We were talking before we started, and we were talking about let's jump into education in the age of COVID-19. So,
Right. And Diane, really quickly before we jump into education,
okay.
something that we didn't even talk about was prison reform as well. So it all ties in, in terms of what Pharaoh mentioned in terms of the war on drugs. The war on drugs tied into arresting, in particular, folks of color for petty crimes in terms of the minimum amount of drugs that they've had, and the harsh sentencing which then arose from this, particularly through strikes in or out. The 1994 crime bill, different respects in terms of handing down harsh sentencing. And then from there, folks being placed in jail a lot of times, and most of the time unfairly, and just the arbitrary measures in which folks were put in jail. And then from there, once they leave the jail physically, in a lot of respects, they never left the jail, because obviously from there, once you're arrested, you have different things you have to abide by in terms of having to remain within a certain area, and of course from there, jobs not wanting to hire you because you have a record, and then having to just reach out to different respects. So in essence, it sort of feeds on itself just with regards to the aspect of policing in general. So when we talk about reimagining policing overall, I think it has perhaps needs to be even a bigger conversation in terms of reimagining society at large, because it ties into our criminal justice, it ties into police, prison reform, it ties into so many different aspects of our society, of course, within education in different respects as well. So, and I think, going back to your original question in terms of how we as an organization can sort of help rectify the situation, I think this conversation helps in terms of providing a lens in terms of the needs which are prevalent and present within our community. And then from there, providing this forum into those folks who have these positions and pretty much holding them accountable in terms of, them pretty much mandating and helping to write laws which sort of provide support for their neighborhoods and for their communities. So I think that's a wonderful way, just this platform in general, that we can hold folks accountable for ensuring that they're doing their job in terms of eliminating white supremacy overall.
Well, see, now we're really hitting on all of the issues, because you can we could jump right into police reform. We could jump into criminal justice reform, and all the kinds of things. But now we can also see that it's bigger than that. There's the whole education reform, what we were talking about before, who is getting what kind of education. And then that leads it, you've got already in the past, you have redlining, and then you've got healthcare. And so what we see is we've got inequality all across the board in every way. And there's nothing really to do that's useful where we can go in and we can demilitarize or defund. We can do that, but if we expect big changes, then it has to expand. So we're talking about huge systemic change, bigger than what we can even imagine. And so that is, now we're really talking about abolish all of our systems, abolish structures, abolish education, because if we don't, and we just pick off one piece, then it's just going to become corrupted. It'll rot, because you haven't gotten far enough out to really make any big difference. So how do we even do that? How do we do that? What can the Racial Justice Collaborative, how can who we are even begin to start to work on some of the problems that we're looking at? Pharaoh, what do you think?
I think that a way in which we could, as an organization, assist with that sort of thing would be to moderate and host dialogues on the community level as to how those groups would want to have those sorts of issues addressed within their own communities. Because things like this are going to have to be handled and discussed on the community level by the people that live in those places. But what we could offer as a group would be our expertise in helping to moderate and facilitate those kinds of discussions. So I think that's something that we could do as a group to help.
I love that. I love that, because what we have is skill in doing just that. So we're not coming in to say this is, and this, I'll say what I think, and then Charles, you can add. I mean, there are some discrete areas that we have specific expertise in, like education for Charles, for curriculum development. But the ability to facilitate dialogue, to have a more open-ended approach to say, okay, just like what we're doing now, our discussion has gone from a very small demilitarize, defund, abolish, and now it keeps expanding until we can see it connects to everything. And so if we look at what can we do as an organization, we can moderate dialogue on a community level. And we can do that all in discrete places all across the world, really, or the country. And then gather data, gather information. What do people want? Until it starts to become clearer, what do we want? That's what we can bring, for sure.
And to even piggyback Pharaoh's point, even within certain communities that are dealing with harsh realities of life. I live not too far away from Newark, New Jersey. I've worked in Newark for many years as a school administrator and a teacher. So one of the ways we could sort of help facilitate that conversation, as Pharaoh was mentioning, was having political leaders and also, various leaders within the community sort of sit in a conversation with just quote unquote regular folks within the community, and pretty much helping to sponsor a conversation in terms of the elected officials having to answer questions from their constituents, from having to, answer questions from folks within their community in terms of, this is what I'm dealing with. What are you going to do about it? And if we could be this forum could be a great facilitator of that conversation, you know.
But
Yep.
so Charles, let me push back a little bit because I don't see the current political system as being useful at all. So,
Mm.
so rather than put our eggs in the basket of calling on our public officials, maybe we need to talk to I like the conversations on race or conversations on anything, but to have community dialogue. And it could be that the community dialogue expands and we decide to bring in, for whatever reason, the political system. But I
Mhm.
would like to see us start with communities.
Well, I think, Diane, to your point, I think that's because the narrative hasn't been set by the community at large. It's been set by those folks who are sort of disconnected from the folks that they are supposed to be working for. So I think it's just a matter of holding those folks accountable in terms of you're doing this job while you're in office. Here are the specific aspects that you need to focus in on while you're supporting this community in terms of proper funding of education, in terms of various other aspects. So I just think the whole narrative and the whole the framework for our local politicians must change. And I think that that narrative has to be set by the community, has to be set by the people. So I think that sort of understanding can help if we sort of hold those folks accountable in terms of them being able to answer questions from their constituents in terms of, okay, so you were called on to do a job. Are you effectively doing that job? I know, you know, in terms of, are you providing enough, you know, social programs to work with young people, to work with folks who are, you know, displaced and not working? Do you have enough of those sort of supports embedded within certain laws, or are you sort of erecting laws which effectively support your community? So I think, to your point, if we hold them accountable for perhaps even changing a lot of aspects in terms of why they're in office, I think that would help in terms of the conversation be more fruitful and effective.
I'm going to push back again because I don't really see the political system as a problem, because people people keep voting for people to do certain jobs, and the problem, to me, it's more of a community issue,
Right.
which is there are a lot of people that are not voting. So
Mm-hmm.
you can hold the politicians accountable, but I don't think that they're not being accountable. They're being accountable to the people are electing them. So
Right.
I think a bigger issue is if we're not voting, then what system do we need? Maybe we don't want to have a democracy. Maybe we don't want to vote. Maybe we want something else. But if we, instead of jumping over the community and or holding the community harmless, why don't we just have a community dialogue to say,
I
okay,
think I think having a community dialogue is important, and that should be the first step. But I definitely think that at some point, motivating the community to take part in the political system is the only way to actually get them to achieve the ends that they discuss, besides issues that they can self-moderate internally. So, because you're right that politicians are generally held accountable to the people that actually vote for them. Usually, not even always, but usually. But that is an issue when people don't vote, and
Right.
people that elect to choose, sorry, I was phrased poorly, people that choose to not be a part of the political system shouldn't be as shouldn't be surprised when it doesn't, support them, because
Mm-hmm.
it is your right, as well as, you know
responsibility.
privilege, yeah, and
Yeah.
responsibility, right? Privilege and responsibility to take part in a democracy, because you have the ability to impact the things around you. And a lot of people feel disenfranchised by democracy, and there's lots of things that, or the democracy in this country specifically, and there are a lot of things working against them. But the biggest thing working against them is the ability to dissuade them to just not vote. That is the biggest form of your vote not mattering, because you're dissuaded from actually using it.
Oh, the gerrymandering. Uh,
Yeah,
and
those are factors, but that
yeah,
gerrymandering will not affect someone, and gerrymandering will not stop someone's vote from mattering as much as them not voting. Nothing
right,
can.
right, right. Now you see. Now we're talking about look at the information that we've seen being poured out into this latest election. So we see a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation. So right along with motivating community to vote, there has to be motivating community to learn what to separate, to discern what's real from what they're being fed. So there's a that's why I'd like to see us focus on moderating community dialogue. let's find out let's find out what the community people feel like is going on, and then we could set up subcommittees to go out and find out what's actually happening. So to me, we need a big education, a populist education, community education effort to find out, okay, what do we want, what do we believe we have, and are we voting or not? Is it a privilege? Is it so? All of this, I before we go and just hold politicians accountable, I want to see what's going on within the community, and how do we see the democracy? Do we even want to have it? Want to have a democracy? Do we see it as privilege? What kind
Mhm.
of responsibility are we willing to take? So a lot of community dialogue to me is what I think we're really well prepared to do without building in a bias from us onto how people should believe and think and decide.
Yep. And I think to the point, just digging even a little deeper, reflecting on my time, working within the school setting, in terms of parent-teacher conferences, in terms of having, various school events. Oftentimes the attendance wasn't where it should have been. And for the most part, the reason was a lot of folks felt disenfranchised, just felt disempowered, particularly if their son or daughter wasn't doing really, particularly well within the school setting. They felt no initiative. They felt it wasn't incumbent on them to really make their voice heard within the school community, because the school community, not that they've done them a disservice, but in a lot of ways they have, because their son or daughter was struggling within the school setting. So I think, on a broader scale, a lot of folks feel disempowered by the system at large. So they don't feel, okay, so I'm going to vote. So is anything going to change in my community? To be frank, hell no. It never trickles down to the folks that really need the support. So I do think if this platform can sort of provide folks, as you mentioned, Diane, with an opportunity to really present their case, give the voiceless a voice in terms of presenting the issues which are prevalent within their communities. And then, through open dialogue, coming up with viable solutions. If we're talking about education, reflecting, I think specifically within, the education setting, providing a curriculum audit overall. This summer, I'm not going to mention the school, but I, along with a few other individuals, I was working with this school in terms of reimagining what schooling would look like in the face of COVID. And in terms of like the funding specifically, a lot of the funding issues had to do with the allocation or the mismanagement of funds, particularly within this community. Violence was a huge issue. So there was over $100,000 of dollars afforded or allotted to policing, allotted to security. So of course, with this particular school, the students not being within the school setting, this school community had to sort of reimagine, what schooling will look like now in the face of COVID. And I think we all had to do that in certain respects. And then from there, we sort of provided a framework in terms of within the school, here's specific issues which are prevalent within your school community. Here are the social systems which you can put in place to sort of like help the community. So just like a full scale holistic approach, as opposed to in the past. Okay, so we need more policing and we need more punitive directives in place to sort of keep the students in line. So I do think in terms of this sort of forum representing a vehicle for, as I mentioned, a lot of folks who felt voiceless and who felt powerless within this system to really have a voice. And then if the right folks, at a certain point, hearing this information and sort of making a pivot towards providing more structures and laws and systems within the community to have a direct line of support for these communities. Could be a wonderful way that this organization could sort of spearhead that effort in terms of providing the direct, tangible support for the community.
I think it's I'm thinking several things. One thing I'm thinking or feeling or believing is that we could almost jump in at any point. We don't have to wait until we've got all the ducks in place to say, okay, we've got all the players and now let's go in and have a dialogue. We could jump in at a variety of places. Just say we pick 4 places and start to initiate bringing a community together to have dialogue. But the other thing is that you keep bringing up, Charles, is well, let me put it this way. I'm a big fan of Eyes on the Prize. And so what I see in Eyes on the Prize as we look at the civil rights movement and we look at the post Civil War and we look at the abolition of, there's an abolition that was actually an abolition of slavery. And so what happened with Black folks? Now, irrespective of what they were not receiving from the white community support, what Black people believed, to me, as I watch it, coming out of slavery was that they believed that if they had education, then that education, learn how to read, learn how to do, they were, that's always been something that has always been said. If you weren't so ignorant, and if you would just go to school, and then you would be able to find your proper place in society. And so if you look at the Eyes on the Prize, the thing that's so striking to me, when you look at whether it was the fire hoses or the dogs, or just the plain marches, or even the children when the 9 and 10, 11-year-old kids were being marched off and they were leading the marches off to jail, what do you see? You see people coming out in their Sunday best. They were dressed and when they first started going to school, they respected education. They respected what they were doing. And so, but what we have found is that you can go to school, you can get a PhD, you can get all of these things, and you're still not going to be able to really compete in this society, because education is not the problem. The issues are still race. And so, but if you look back, you'll see that students would come and everybody was all dressed up because they believed that what they were doing counted, what they were doing mattered. And now it's going to be a little complicated to get people to come back and see education as the answer when education hasn't been the answer, and you can get all educated and you still don't have, it's still about race. So I think we have to, it's a deeper issue than just some kind of systemic change that we need to do or that anybody needs to do. I think it's a whole lot of issues of belief. Do we believe that voting is even going to count? Do we believe, I think that's what we're seeing now, not just with Black people, at one point there was 36% of the voting age population were carrying these elections. People have stopped believing. So what is it going to take for us to believe again? And then there's where your motivation comes. We believe that what we're doing is going to count and it's going to matter. How do we get to that? Pharaoh, what do you think?
I think that the full layout of that is something that's very difficult to see at an early stage. I think that you have to start with community organization and community dialogue, but I think that it is the responsibility of facilitators to help move those in constructive directions. So it's important to have them, and it's important to field those opinions, but it's also important to have, to have like a whip, like in a political body, a whip's job is to keep things from stagnating too late. So that's important to have in this kind of discussion as well.
I think, and so Charles, I want to bring you in on this because what I'm feeling as we're continuing to talk about this, I'm feeling even more strongly that if we pick four, like I'm now looking at our, we're coming up in May or June, we're going to do another race retreat. And so what should that, how can we structure that retreat? And to me, it's just, instead of having an already decided idea, we're going to bring in the politicians, we're going to hold them in the blah, blah, blah. Instead of doing that, why isn't it more open-ended? Community. What does the community need in order to what? To become engaged. We're talking about how do you foster engagement in a system that has not worked for Black people?
And I think just building on what you're saying, you're talking about how do we build intrinsic motivation. So in other words, not forcing, if you talk about the school setting, young people to do as they're told because they're told, but it's a matter of you having, or a student having that sort of that inner want, that inner know-how, I don't like the word know-how, that sort of like intestinal fortitude to sort of make a better life for themselves. And from there, just making a better community at large. And I think what you're talking about, Diane, is just a full-scale reimagining of education as we currently see it. And I think that can take place, just framing it within what we can offer in terms of having, I guess, individuals like myself and Pharaoh, and of course you, Diane, go into the schools and sort of helping to spur the conversation in terms of framing a curriculum that fits the needs of the students and not the other way around. One size does not fit all. The students that you have in New Mexico cannot be the same way that you're going to teach students in New York City or in downtown Boston or throughout the country. So I do think there has to be a reimagining in terms of the specific curriculums that are in place, particularly dealing with the African American diaspora, having a specific focus around our history in general, as Pharaoh might have mentioned within the last session. And then from there, just ensuring that students understand their history. And from understanding their history, understanding the connection that they have in terms of what they're learning in the classroom sort of connects within the community at large. So in other words, you learn this and you learn this craft, this connects to this particular profession. And I think that there's a disconnect in terms of, for a lot of students, what they're learning in the school has no connection outside of the school setting. So I do think it's important to provide that connection for a lot of for young people in general, and for folks at large, in terms of schools are important because it provides the vehicle for, of course, doing whatever it is you want to do in life. But even at a larger scale, it just provides a connection with whatever it is you want to do. This is how you do it. So it's sort of reimagining school, not so much in terms of passing a test, but in terms of getting the skills necessary for entering into the vocation you see fit to enter into. And I think we have so many like-minded and intelligent individuals that can sort of help school districts sort of reconstruct and reframe their curriculums at large to provide a more structured focus in terms of teaching, in particular, Black young people their history, and then from there providing a connection between what's being learned in the classroom to the outside world.
Yeah, well, okay, let's look at this. When we started the conversation, we were talking about the police and reimagining the police. And we spoke of the police in the community, but we never really got into that. But now let's look at um, schools, yes, but also community.
Right.
Schools play a role, but families play a role as well.
Right.
Because it's like what you said, Charles, it's that PTA. Who does not come to the PTA meetings? Who is not supporting their students? So you cannot put all of this on schools and on
Right.
teachers. This you also have to say, what about parents? And even bigger, what about the community? And so then the community might say, okay, I might be a parent and I might say, I'm working two essential worker. That means I'm making minimum wage, $10 an hour job, and I have to do three of these just to put food on the table. And I don't have time to go to the school meetings. And on top of that, I don't think it's going to matter
Mm-hmm.
because I've got a master's degree and I still have two minimum wage jobs. So there's got to be some understanding, some belief. Now, to me, it's belief. It's to me, it's not about the belief so much, although there is that too with the teachers in the schools, but in the with the parents, it's got to be. I have to believe that what I'm getting ready to do matters, that it's
Right.
going to make a difference in my life and in the life of my children. So and so then there's this bigger other issue of this whole wealth gap thing and the health gap. And so I this is what I would think we might be able to do. We could do two of those. Well, let's the police are harder because I think the police are more hard edged and really don't want to hear it. I don't think that there's that dissonance so much with parents and community and schools. So what if we set up some dialogue? Just bring some parents, some community. I don't want to just say parents. I mean, communities are bigger than just the parents.
Right.
Community, bring the community together and then bring the school together and see what they each individually believe. And then what we are doing is facilitating the dialogue to see, because what we're looking for is that common thread. Where's the thread that can go down through schools and down through the community? Where's the thread that can come through this community and go over to the school? And once we can see those, then there's a place to start. And then so there's that. And we could do the police as well, but I'm just feeling like the community and the schools are not so antagonistic as the community and the police.
And then even on a larger scale, having folks who come from these communities, who's quote unquote made it, folks within certain industries, provide an opportunity for them to speak to the community at large in terms of telling them, okay, so by doing X, Y, and Z, you could potentially have this career. Just in terms of providing that connection between the community with just community members, just having more of a say and having more enthusiasm with sort of making their community better. That sort of comes with folks having opportunity. Let's be honest, having more opportunity to sort of make their situation better. So providing perhaps opportunities for folks to talk about various aspects of their careers, or pretty much providing an opportunity to sort of facilitate teaching various aspects of the community in terms of what we, in terms of, making them better.
So, so Charles, what I hear you saying, I'm okay. I'm going to see if I can bring I'm here, down
Right.
here, with
Right.
the bare. Let's look at the bare minimum. Let's look at communities and see what do communities even believe. Let's
Right.
start with that belief, because what you're talking about is a higher level of after we believe something, then we're going to talk about now these are the opportunities that are available. But in my mind, see, I've participated in a lot of events where you have school or program open houses, and you invite community. I'll give you an example. I was participating in a community event where the community they were planting trees in a park. They were planting trees in a park, and so all they wanted the community to do was come together and decide where they wanted to plant the trees. And the
Mhm.
community had to come together to plant the trees. And so they had meetings, community meetings. And they said, okay, because they actually came to my house, knocked on the door, and said, would you come to a community meeting? They said, oh, and by the way, we'll pay you $20. I said, you're going to pay me $20, and all I have to do is come to this meeting to discuss where you're going to plant a tree in my community. And they
Right.
said, yes. And they said, and now for children, we've got daycare for them, whatever it's called, daycare or something. And we're going to provide a meal. So it's an evening meeting. They're going to provide a meal. They've got childcare, and they're going to pay you $20. So I go to the meeting, right? Two of us, two people were there. So
Mhm.
this is a situation where they're just coming to the community to find out where you want trees in your own community. They're going to pay you, they're going to feed you, and they're going to provide childcare. And I said, okay, there's a problem here.
Mhm.
There's a problem here. So that's why I don't see, I see a lot of opportunities like what you're talking about. Schools love doing that. They like to have, parents come out and talk about, this is how I got here. But the issue is nobody comes to those meetings. So when I look at, I'm going to be paid and I'm going to be fed and nobody's going to come anyway, I say we have a bigger issue. And so all I want to do is have an opportunity to start to have a voice just to talk about whatever it is that's going to bring you out. And I think getting ourselves to facilitate
Talk
each,
about community organizing. You talk about,
yeah,
and that takes time.
yeah,
That,
yeah,
that takes time for folks to feel comfortable with coming to a forum where they
yeah,
think that, what's the point of me coming to your point? And it's building that rapport that what you're getting here will help you moving forward. So it's going to take time to build that rapport and that I guess meet their approval in terms of folks letting down their walls and talking freely about some of the needs that they have.
And you know
Um,
what?
right.
I don't think we can skip over that step. And I think the reason we're here, we're in the place where we are now, is because nobody ever wants to take the time to do that community organizing kind of work. And so what that says to me is, as I look at the collaborative, because we've got educators and we've got conflict facilitators, and we even now have mindfulness. So we're going to deal with the stress. But one group we don't have is called community organizers. So when I look at who else do we need, we're going to put the call out. We need community organizers. Pharaoh, you're really pinpointing a lot of things, and I want to bring you out of what we've said just now. Where do you think this can go? How do you think we can start as an organization?
Well, I think that it's important to help bring attention to the issues that are impacted by this sort of community organizing. You're describing how a lot of the time it's hard to get people involved in it because they don't see it as directly impacting them or being important to them. And that's often because of one, either just difficulty in balancing obligations, which is hard to avoid, but oftentimes it's just because of disconnect on how it impacts people. A lot of people aren't sure how things are tied to them because those things aren't greatly obvious. So helping to raise awareness about that sort of thing, I think, will help raise participation and things like that. Because if you can directly tie how going to a meeting where you discuss things actually ties into things like property value and stuff like that, which impacts you economically, then people will be more inclined to understand that it matters for them in the long term. Even if it's not that week, if it's not that month, it could be years down the road, but it will be something that matters importantly.
And we are going to have to come up with some things that are going to impact right now. I mean, what is going to impact, and then build on that.
Well, it's usually not how it works. There usually aren't things that directly impact someone in that moment. There's usually delay. And that's what makes it difficult. You have to think in advance. Not everything is short term.
That's true. But I'm just pointing out. I already pointed out that if you look back at post Civil War, and you looked at the I mean, that's when a lot of the black colleges and universities. That's when they were. The people didn't have food to eat, but they built colleges and schools. They believed. They desired. They believed. Things weren't any easier then than they are now. But they believed, and we don't have belief. We don't have belief. That's hard because we've used our currency. We've squandered the belief that people had, and now we didn't build anything to them to form a connection between this that we're talking about and the life that you live. But after the Civil War, they built colleges, Hampton and Howard, and they built colleges. They built these one-room schools that only black kids could. They had to sit and share books, but they sent their kids to those schools because they believed that it was going to help and it was going to make a difference. So, and people have that same heart right now. We just have to find out, where does their heart lie? Where is the desire right now that's going to tap into that same energy of belief that picked people up from slavery to learning how to read and write? We still have it in our heart. We have to
And Diane,
find.
you're talking about just wraparound services. So I think meeting with communities, community members or individuals is one aspect, community leaders is another aspect, educators is another aspect. And I think within our collaborative, we have the initiative to sort of provide those wraparound supports that these, the various aspects of a community have and need. So within a school setting, providing an opportunity for connection with individuals, provide those social service supports, I think is such a necessary thing, as opposed to just thinking beyond just math and reading. It's a matter of providing wraparound supports that extend far beyond the classroom. And I think it's a matter of providing the connections between what's happening in the school with various organizations who could provide that support, including, of course, us, in terms of like what that looks like, and helping to provide that framework. I think is something that we as an organization can definitely move towards.
Well, that's something that we can aim our effort toward, bringing in people for dialogue.
Right.
And it could be 4 different areas. It can be 2 different areas. It can be one thing, but
So literally
something.
just setting a call to districts, and in terms of providing a historical perspective, having Pharaoh or whoever, Sundiata or whoever else provide that historical perspective in terms of the curriculum support, Lou or myself, just thinking about folks within the organization who could provide the specific tangible supports within the school setting, I think is key, just to, as you mentioned, just to have that conversation, just to spark that initial call to action, in other words. And then from there, having the conversations with community members and of course, community leaders, just in terms of them articulating what the needs are within their community, and setting up different forums and different avenues for folks who can provide that direct support within that specific community in terms of helping them directly is something that we could definitely do as well.
Okay. Now, because you just said educators, community leaders, politicians, social service. So if we look at the members of the collaborative, and we see where they, you know, which one of these things they fit, and then start to talk about developing even a Zoom forum. It's like I think of Sundiata. He's in Atlanta, and he belongs to a community of artists. Start wherever we have expertise.
Right.
Okay, we're at the end of our time. That was fast.
Man, too fast.
Yeah, we're going to come back and do this some more because I think we're seeing what we can do. Racial Justice Collaborative, what can we do right now? And we can start to develop um, community dialogue with different. It's like you said, Lou has that's you and Lou probably are in that same kind of a community. Sundiata, um, Nancy is in the church community. I mean,
Mhm.
so we'll start doing that, and then we'll see what do we have, and then we'll see where do we go from there. So thank you, Pharaoh. Can you end this for us? Can you wrap this up?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely the direction that we need to go, and I think that we did a decent job analyzing the role that we can play as an organization in terms of helping facilitate and direct that. So that's really important.
Yes, Charles. Would you say a word?
Yeah, I'm just going to end with a Malcolm X quote, someone near and dear to my heart. As long as we stay in these conditions, we will keep on begging him and he will control us. We can never win freedom, justice, and equality until we are doing something for ourselves. So in essence, it's not a matter of someone swooping down and helping us. We have to help ourselves. And I think part of this collaborative, part of our initiative will be to sort of provide a voice for individuals being able to help their families and of course the community at large.
Yes, and each person in the collaborative came to the collaborative because they wanted to do this. So let's start developing some forums and find out what do each one of these communities want. What do we want? That's the big question. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to end so that we
Always a
can.
pleasure. Take care, everyone.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.